Have you ever wondered what it was like to rule an entire kingdom when winter meant death was knocking at your door? When the cold wasn't just uncomfortable, but a deadly enemy that could starve entire populations and freeze armies in their tracks? Well, the answer isn't what you might think. Medieval queens didn't just survive these brutal winters. They thrived, wielding power and making decisions that would determine whether their people lived or died before spring returned. So in this video, I'm going to reveal the incredible stories of 5 noble women who didn't just endure medieval winters, they conquered them. These queens faced challenges that would break modern leaders, from managing food stores that meant life or death, to commanding armies across frozen battlefields, to negotiating treaties while snow piled up outside castle walls. What I'm going to show you will completely change how you think about medieval women and the raw power they possessed during the harshest months of the year. But first, let me give you an example so you understand just how brutal these winter courts actually were. Imagine ruling a kingdom where a single bad harvest means watching thousands of your subjects slowly starve, where your castle becomes a frozen fortress that's impossible to escape, and every decision you make echoes through stone corridors that feel more like ice caves than royal halls. This wasn't just uncomfortable. This was medieval survival at its most extreme. The queens I'm about to show you didn't have central heating, reliable food supplies, or modern medicine. They had to manage entire kingdoms using nothing but their intelligence, political skill, and sheer determination, while battling conditions that would challenge even our most advanced modern societies. These women prove that true leadership isn't about having perfect conditions. It's about thriving when everything around you is trying to kill you. Now, here's what makes this even more incredible. I've spent months researching primary sources, medieval chronicles, and archaeological evidence to uncover stories that most people have never heard. These aren't the sanitized fairy tale versions of medieval queens you learned in school. These are real women who faced real challenges that would terrify anyone living today. So get ready to discover how Queen Margaret of Scotland turned winter into her strategic advantage, how Eleanor of Aquitaine commanded loyalty, even when her breath froze in the air, and how other remarkable women used the coldest, darkest months to cement their power in ways that would influence history for centuries. Let's start with something most people never consider about medieval winters. When we think about the Middle Ages, we imagine knights and castles and grand feasts, but we rarely think about what happened when the temperature dropped below freezing and stayed there for months. Medieval winter wasn't just cold, it was a complete transformation of how society functioned. Picture this. You're a queen in the year 1100 and October has just ended. The last harvest is stored in your granaries, and now you have to make it last until spring. But here's the thing, you don't know if spring will come in March, April, or even May. You don't have weather forecasts. You don't have backup food supplies from other countries. What you have in storage right now is literally the difference between life and death for thousands of people. Every medieval queen faced this reality, but the great ones didn't just survive it. They used it to consolidate power in ways that would be impossible during any other season. Winter was when a queen's true skills were tested, and only the most capable leaders emerged stronger when the snow finally melted. The first thing these remarkable women understood was that winter changed everything about medieval politics. During summer, nobles could travel between castles, armies could march across the countryside, and trade routes stayed open. But winter locked everything down. Roads became impassable, rivers froze solid, communication between kingdoms slowed to a crawl. For weak rulers, this isolation was devastating. They lost control of distant territories, couldn't respond to threats, and watched their authority crumble with each snowfall. But for brilliant queens, winter became an opportunity. When you control the only warm castle for 50 miles, when you hold the keys to the food stores, when you're the only source of protection from the brutal cold, people don't just respect your authority, they depend on it completely. This is where our first queen enters the story, and her approach to winter rule was absolutely genius. Margaret of Scotland, who lived from 1045 to 1093, understood something that most medieval rulers missed entirely. She realized that winter wasn't just about surviving until spring. It was about creating conditions that would strengthen her position for the entire following year. Margaret faced a challenge that would have destroyed lesser rulers. She was a Saxon princess who had to maintain power in Scotland during one of the most turbulent periods in medieval history. The Norman conquest had just turned her world upside down, and she found herself in a foreign court where every winter could potentially be her last if she made the wrong political moves. But Margaret had a strategy that was decades ahead of her time. Instead of just hoarding resources like most rulers, she turned her winter court into something unprecedented, a center of learning and culture that attracted the most brilliant minds from across Europe, even during the coldest months of the year. Here's how she did it. While other castles became grim survival bunkers during winter, Margaret's court remained active and vibrant. She established what we would recognize today as the first medieval think tank, gathering scholars, artists, and political advisors who would spend the long winter months developing new ideas that would transform Scottish society. This wasn't just about keeping people entertained during the dark months. Margaret understood that winter was when people had time to think, to plan, to develop new strategies. While her enemies were hibernating in their own castles, she was building the intellectual foundation for political moves that would catch everyone off guard when spring arrived. The results were extraordinary. Margaret's winter courts became legendary across medieval Europe. Nobles would actually volunteer to spend the harsh months in Scotland just to participate in her discussions and debates. This gave her access to information and political intelligence that other rulers could never obtain. But Margaret's winter strategy went far beyond just gathering smart people. She understood that winter was when medieval society's power structures became most visible. When food is scarce, when warmth is precious, when survival depends on cooperation, you can see exactly who has real influence and who just pretends to have it. During her winter courts, Margaret would carefully observe how different nobles and advisors behaved under pressure. Who shared resources generously? Who hoarded supplies? Who remained calm during crisis situations? Who panicked when problems arose? This information became invaluable for making political appointments and alliances that would serve her throughout the rest of the year. The genius of Margaret's approach was that she turned winter's limitations into advantages. Yes, communication with the outside world was restricted, but that meant her court became a concentrated environment where relationships could deepen and trust could develop. Yes, resources were limited, but that created opportunities to demonstrate leadership through fair distribution and careful planning. Margaret also pioneered what we might call winter diplomacy. She discovered that negotiations conducted during the coldest months carried different weight than summer discussions. When diplomats had to risk dangerous winter travel just to meet with her, it demonstrated serious commitment. When agreements were reached while snow piled up outside, both parties knew they were making deals that would have lasting importance. This approach to winter governance was revolutionary because it challenged the basic assumption that cold months were simply something to endure. Margaret proved that winter could be the most productive and politically significant time of the year if you had the vision and skill to use it properly. Her success attracted attention from across medieval Europe, and soon other queens were attempting to copy her methods. But Margaret had advantages that went beyond just her innovative approach to winter rule. She possessed personal qualities that made her uniquely suited for cold weather leadership. Medieval chroniclers describe Margaret as someone who seemed to draw energy from challenging conditions. While others became depressed and lethargic during the long, dark months, she became more focused and determined. This psychological resilience was crucial because medieval winter wasn't just physically demanding, it was mentally and emotionally exhausting. Think about spending 5 months in a stone castle with no central heating, no electric lights, and no way to communicate with the outside world. The psychological pressure was intense, and many rulers cracked under the strain. Margaret not only survived this pressure, she channeled it into creative problem-solving that strengthened her kingdom. Her approach to managing winter food supplies demonstrates this perfectly. Instead of simply rationing stored grain like other rulers, Margaret developed what we might recognize as an early form of economic planning. She calculated not just how much food was needed for survival, but how much extra was required to maintain morale, support unexpected guests, and create surplus for strategic gifts to important allies. This required mathematical skills that were rare in medieval Europe, but Margaret had received an unusually sophisticated education that prepared her for exactly these kinds of challenges. She could calculate complex resource allocation problems in her head, factor in variables like weather patterns and population changes, and make decisions that balanced immediate survival needs with long-term political goals. The results spoke for themselves, while other kingdoms struggled with winter famines and social unrest. Margaret's Scotland maintained stability and even prosperity during the harshest months. Her success became a model that influenced medieval governance for generations. But Margaret's story is just the beginning. Each of the queens we're going to explore developed her own unique approach to winter rule, and their combined strategies reveal secrets about medieval leadership that have been hidden for centuries. The second queen who mastered winter rule took a completely different approach, and her methods were so effective they terrified her enemies across Europe. Eleanor of Aquitaine, who lived from 1122 to 1204, understood something that Margaret had only begun to explore. She realized that winter wasn't just an opportunity for internal governance. It was the perfect time to wage psychological warfare against rival kingdoms. Eleanor faced challenges that would have crushed most medieval rulers. She controlled vast territories across France and England, but her power was constantly threatened by ambitious nobles who saw winter as the perfect time to rebel. They assumed that cold weather would limit her ability to respond to uprisings, making winter the ideal season for treachery. They could not have been more wrong. Eleanor developed what medieval chroniclers called the winter terror strategy. Instead of retreating to a single castle like most rulers, she created a network of mobile winter courts that could appear anywhere in her territories without warning. Imagine being a rebellious noble, comfortable in your castle, assuming you're safe until spring, when suddenly Eleanor's entire court materializes outside your walls in the middle of a blizzard. This wasn't just impressive, it was psychologically devastating. Eleanor's ability to move her court through winter conditions that stopped everyone else proved she possessed resources and capabilities that bordered on the supernatural in medieval minds. Nobles who were planning revolts would receive word that Eleanor had been spotted 300 miles away just days earlier, making her presence in their region seem impossible. The secret behind Eleanor's winter mobility was her revolutionary approach to cold weather logistics. While other rulers stored supplies in fixed locations, Eleanor developed a system of distributed supply caches hidden throughout her territories. These secret stockpiles contained everything needed to sustain her court for weeks, from food and wine to weapons and warm clothing. But Eleanor's logistics went far beyond just storing supplies. She recruited and trained servants who specialized in winter operations. These weren't ordinary castle staff. They were experts in cold weather survival who could set up temporary courts in conditions that would kill untrained people. They knew how to keep fires burning in harsh winds, how to preserve food without proper storage, how to maintain horses and equipment when temperatures dropped far below freezing. This specialized workforce gave Eleanor capabilities that seemed magical to her contemporaries. Her court could appear in remote locations during the worst winter storms, fully equipped with all the ceremony and luxury expected of royal presence. Rebellious nobles would wake up to discover Eleanor holding formal court sessions in their own territories, dispensing justice and receiving loyalty oaths while snow swirled around her temporary throne. The psychological impact was extraordinary. Eleanor's winter appearances became legendary across medieval Europe. Stories spread about the queen who could command the elements, who traveled through blizzards as easily as other rulers moved through summer gardens. These legends enhanced her political power far beyond what military force alone could achieve. Eleanor also pioneered winter intelligence gathering that was decades ahead of its time. She understood that cold weather created unique opportunities for espionage. During winter, people gathered around fires to share news and gossip. Travelers were rare, making strangers memorable, but also making it easier for spies to blend in as desperate refugees seeking shelter. Eleanor's network of winter spies was vast and sophisticated. They posed as merchants, pilgrims, and wandering scholars, gathering information about noble loyalties, military preparations, and political conspiracies throughout her territories. The intelligence they provided allowed Eleanor to identify and neutralize threats before they could mature into serious rebellions. This spy network also served another crucial purpose. It allowed Eleanor to monitor the effectiveness of her own winter governance. She could receive detailed reports about how her policies were affecting common people in remote villages, whether local officials were abusing their authority, and how winter hardships were influencing public opinion about her rule. The information flowing back to Eleanor during winter months was incredibly detailed. Her spies reported not just on political matters, but on economic conditions, social tensions, and even family disputes among important noble families. This comprehensive intelligence gave Eleanor advantages that other rulers couldn't match. But Eleanor's winter mastery extended far beyond intelligence and mobility. She developed diplomatic strategies that turned winter's isolation into a powerful negotiating tool. When foreign ambassadors visited her court during winter, they found themselves completely dependent on her hospitality for survival. This dependency gave Eleanor enormous leverage in negotiations. Think about the psychology involved. An ambassador arriving at Eleanor's court in the middle of winter couldn't simply leave if negotiations went poorly. The weather made departure impossible, creating a captive audience for Eleanor's diplomatic pressure. She could extend negotiations for months, gradually wearing down opposition, while demonstrating her power through lavish hospitality that proved her resources were unlimited, even during the harshest season. Eleanor's winter diplomatic receptions became famous throughout medieval Europe. Foreign diplomats would describe arriving at her court during blizzards to find warm halls filled with music, elaborate feasts, and intellectual discussions that continued deep into the night. The contrast between the deadly cold outside and the luxurious warmth inside sent a clear message about Eleanor's capabilities. These diplomatic winters also allowed Eleanor to forge alliances that would have been impossible during other seasons. When you've survived months of harsh weather together, when you've shared resources and protected each other from winter's dangers, the bonds formed are much deeper than normal political agreements. Eleanor's winter allies remained loyal through challenges that would have broken ordinary diplomatic relationships. The third remarkable aspect of Eleanor's winter strategy was her approach to cultural warfare. She understood that winter was when people craved entertainment, warmth, and beauty most desperately. While her enemies' courts became grim survival bunkers, Eleanor's winter gatherings featured the finest musicians, poets, and artists in Europe. This wasn't just about luxury. Eleanor was waging a battle for hearts and minds. When nobles compared the vibrant culture of Eleanor's winter court with the dreary isolation of their own castles, the choice of where to pledge loyalty became obvious. Eleanor's cultural superiority during winter months attracted the best talent from across Europe, further enhancing her political position. Eleanor's courts became the birthplace of new art forms specifically designed for winter audiences. The romantic poetry that emerged from her gatherings influenced European literature for centuries. The musical innovations developed during long winter evenings established traditions that spread across medieval courts. Eleanor wasn't just ruling territory, she was creating culture that enhanced her soft power throughout the medieval world. But perhaps Eleanor's most brilliant winter innovation was her approach to succession planning. She used winter isolation to train her children in governance skills that couldn't be learned during busy summer seasons. Winter provided uninterrupted time for intensive education in politics, diplomacy, economics, and military strategy. Eleanor's children learned statecraft by participating in real winter governance. They observed negotiations, helped plan resource distribution, and participated in intelligence analysis. By the time they reached adulthood, they possessed practical experience that other royal children couldn't match. This gave Eleanor's dynasty advantages that lasted for generations. The effectiveness of Eleanor's winter training became clear when her sons assumed power. They inherited not just territories and wealth, but sophisticated systems for winter governance that their mother had perfected over decades. They understood how to use cold weather as a strategic advantage, rather than simply enduring it as a seasonal hardship. Eleanor's winter legacy influenced medieval governance throughout Europe. Other queens attempted to copy her methods, but few possessed the intelligence, resources, and sheer determination necessary to execute such complex strategies successfully. Eleanor had transformed winter from a limitation into a weapon, and that transformation required exceptional leadership skills. Her success also created new expectations for medieval queens. After Eleanor, winter competence became a measure of royal capability. Queens who couldn't maintain effective governance during cold months were seen as weak and unsuitable for power. Eleanor had raised the standards for what medieval leadership required. The chronicles describing Eleanor's winter courts reveal details that seem almost impossible by medieval standards. They describe heated discussions that lasted until dawn, elaborate ceremonies conducted in rooms so warm that participants could remove their heavy winter clothing, and feasts featuring fresh foods that should have been impossible to obtain during the coldest months. These descriptions weren't exaggerated. Eleanor had developed supply networks and preservation techniques that allowed her to maintain luxury standards even when other courts were struggling with basic survival. Her winter innovations in food storage, heating, and transportation were technological advances that wouldn't become common for centuries. But Eleanor's story reveals something even more important about medieval winter leadership. She understood that the harsh conditions created opportunities for leaders who were willing to take risks that others considered impossible. While her competitors retreated into defensive positions, Eleanor used winter as a time for expansion and consolidation. This aggressive winter strategy required enormous confidence and exceptional planning abilities. Eleanor had to calculate risks and resources with mathematical precision, factoring in variables that could mean the difference between triumph and catastrophe. Her success proved that medieval queens possessed intellectual capabilities that historians have consistently underestimated. Now we're ready to explore our third queen, whose winter innovations were so advanced they seem to belong to a much later historical period. But before we meet her, you need to understand something crucial about medieval winter warfare that most people never consider. When most people think about medieval warfare, they imagine summer campaigns with armies marching across green fields under bright sunshine. But the reality is that winter warfare was where the most decisive battles were won and lost. Snow and ice didn't stop medieval conflicts. They transformed them into something far more brutal and strategic than anything we see in Hollywood movies. Medieval winter warfare was psychological torture combined with logistical nightmares. Imagine trying to besiege a castle when your siege engines freeze solid overnight. Picture attempting to maintain army discipline when soldiers are losing fingers to frostbite and horses are dying from the cold faster than enemy arrows can kill them. Most commanders avoided winter campaigns entirely because the conditions made victory nearly impossible. But our third queen saw opportunity where others saw only death and disaster. Matilda of Tuscany, who ruled from 1046 to 1115, understood that winter warfare offered advantages that could never be achieved during traditional campaigning seasons. She developed military strategies that turned frozen landscapes into weapons more powerful than any sword or catapult. Matilda faced enemies who controlled vastly superior resources and commanded larger armies. During summer months, she was consistently outnumbered and outgunned. Traditional military wisdom suggested she should avoid direct confrontation and focus on defensive strategies. But Matilda realized that winter completely changed the mathematical equations that determined military success. Here's what made her approach revolutionary. While her enemies struggled to maintain large armies during winter months, Matilda deliberately kept her forces small and mobile. She trained elite units that could operate effectively in conditions that destroyed conventional military formations. Her soldiers weren't just warriors, they were Arctic survival specialists who could fight battles that other armies couldn't even attempt. Matilda's winter warriors wore specially designed armor that provided protection without restricting movement in deep snow. They used weapons modified for cold weather combat, with grip surfaces that wouldn't slip when hands were numb from freezing temperatures. Most importantly, they were trained in tactics that exploited winter conditions rather than simply enduring them. The psychological impact of Matilda's winter campaigns was devastating to her enemies. Imagine being a medieval soldier, huddled around a fire in your winter camp, when suddenly you're under attack by warriors who seem completely unaffected by conditions that are slowly killing you. Matilda's forces appeared out of blizzards like supernatural beings, struck with deadly precision, and disappeared back into the snow before effective counterattacks could be organized. But Matilda's winter military innovations went far beyond just training better soldiers. She developed siege techniques specifically designed for frozen conditions. While other commanders found that traditional siege methods became impossible during winter, Matilda invented approaches that actually worked better in cold weather than during summer campaigns. Her engineers discovered that frozen ground provided more stable foundations for siege equipment than soft summer soil. They learned to use ice as construction material, building temporary fortifications and siege platforms that were stronger than anything made from wood or stone. Most brilliantly, they figured out how to use winter weather itself as a weapon against enemy fortifications. Matilda's forces would divert streams and rivers to flood areas around enemy castles, then wait for the water to freeze solid. This created ice barriers that made castle walls much easier to scale, while simultaneously cutting off water supplies that defenders needed for survival. The technique was so effective that some castles surrendered without fighting, rather than face the slow death of winter siege warfare. These innovative siege methods required mathematical precision that was extraordinary for the medieval period. Matilda had to calculate water flow rates, freezing temperatures, and structural engineering principles that wouldn't be formally understood for centuries. Her success proves that medieval women possessed technical knowledge that historians have consistently overlooked. Matilda also pioneered winter intelligence warfare that was decades ahead of its time. She understood that snow and ice created unique opportunities for espionage and counterintelligence. Footprints in snow revealed enemy movements with perfect clarity. Frozen rivers became highways that allowed rapid movement of spies and messengers. Winter storms provided cover for infiltration operations that would be impossible during clear weather. Her spy networks operated most effectively during winter months because the harsh conditions created natural disguises. A person struggling through a blizzard looked like any other winter traveler, making it easy for agents to move through enemy territory without attracting suspicion. Matilda's spies posed as refugees fleeing winter hardships, gaining access to enemy camps and fortifications while appearing completely harmless. The intelligence gathered during these winter operations gave Matilda strategic advantages that lasted throughout the following year. She knew exactly which enemy commanders were effective during harsh conditions, which fortifications had weaknesses that only appeared during winter, and which supply lines could be disrupted when cold weather made replacement impossible. But perhaps Matilda's most innovative winter strategy involved economic warfare that was centuries ahead of its time. She realized that winter trade disruptions could devastate enemy resources more effectively than military attacks. While other rulers focused on capturing territory, Matilda targeted the economic networks that made enemy resistance possible. Her forces would strike at supply convoys during winter storms, when visibility was nearly zero and rescue was impossible. They would destroy bridges and block mountain passes, just as winter weather made repairs impossible until spring. Most effectively, they would capture or destroy stored food supplies, knowing that replacement would be impossible until the next harvest season. These economic attacks were precisely calculated to create maximum damage with minimal risk. Matilda's forces could strike quickly and disappear into winter weather that made pursuit impossible. Her enemies found themselves fighting not just against her armies, but against the combined effects of military pressure and economic strangulation during the season when both were most deadly. The results were extraordinary. Enemies who seemed invincible during summer campaigns would collapse entirely after a single winter of Matilda's economic warfare. Their armies would desert rather than face another season without adequate supplies. Their allies would switch sides rather than endure the economic hardships that Matilda's strategies created. Matilda's success attracted attention from military leaders throughout medieval Europe. Her winter warfare innovations were studied and copied by commanders who recognized their effectiveness. But few possessed the combination of strategic intelligence, logistical expertise, and psychological insight necessary to execute such complex operations successfully. The chronicles describing Matilda's winter campaigns read like military science fiction. They describe armies moving through blizzards with supernatural speed, siege equipment that functioned perfectly in conditions that destroyed conventional weapons, and battles fought in weather so severe that survival itself seemed impossible. These accounts weren't exaggerated. Matilda had developed military technologies and techniques that wouldn't become common for centuries. Her innovations in cold weather logistics, Arctic warfare tactics, and winter siege methods were genuine advances that gave her decisive advantages over enemies who were still using traditional approaches. But Matilda's winter military mastery revealed something even more important about medieval female leadership. She understood that conventional wisdom about warfare was based on assumptions that could be challenged and overturned. While male commanders accepted limitations that seemed obvious, Matilda questioned whether those limitations were actually real. This intellectual independence was crucial to her success. Matilda didn't just adapt existing military strategies for winter conditions. She invented entirely new approaches that had never been attempted before. Her willingness to experiment with radical innovations during the most dangerous season demonstrated leadership qualities that were extraordinary by any historical standard. Matilda's legacy influenced military thinking throughout medieval Europe. Her winter warfare techniques were incorporated into military manuals that guided commanders for generations. The strategic principles she developed became foundation concepts for later innovations in siege warfare, intelligence operations, and economic conflict. Her success also challenged assumptions about female military leadership that had persisted for centuries. After Matilda, medieval commanders could no longer dismiss the possibility that women might possess superior strategic intelligence. Her winter victories proved that gender was irrelevant to military genius. The fourth queen who mastered winter rule developed strategies that were so sophisticated they influenced European politics for centuries. But her approach was completely different from the military innovations of Matilda or the diplomatic brilliance of Eleanor. This queen understood that winter's greatest power lay not in warfare or politics, but in something far more fundamental to medieval society. Berengaria of Navarre, who lived from 1165 to 1230, recognized that winter was when medieval society's spiritual and psychological foundations were most vulnerable. The long dark months tested people's faith, hope, and mental stability in ways that summer prosperity never could. While other queens focused on political or military strategies, Berengaria developed approaches to winter leadership that addressed the deepest human needs. Her insight was revolutionary because it challenged basic assumptions about medieval governance. Most rulers treated winter as a time for maintaining existing power structures, until spring allowed normal activities to resume. Berengaria understood that winter was actually when power structures could be fundamentally transformed, but only if leaders addressed the psychological and spiritual crises that cold weather created. Think about the mental health challenges of medieval winter. Months of darkness, isolation, and survival anxiety created depression and despair that could destroy entire communities. People would lose hope, abandon responsibilities, and sometimes commit suicide rather than endure another winter. These psychological casualties were often more devastating than military defeats or political failures. Berengaria developed what we might recognize today as the first systematic approach to winter mental health in medieval Europe. She created programs designed to maintain morale, provide psychological support, and give people reasons to survive until spring returned. These weren't just charitable activities, they were sophisticated governance strategies that strengthened her political position. Her winter courts became centers for activities specifically designed to combat seasonal depression. She organized musical performances, storytelling competitions, and artistic projects that gave people creative outlets during the darkest months. But these weren't random entertainment. They were carefully planned psychological interventions based on her understanding of human nature. Berengaria had studied the effects of winter isolation on human behavior with scientific precision that was centuries ahead of her time. She understood that people needed social connection, creative expression, and spiritual meaning to maintain psychological stability during harsh conditions. Her winter programs provided all three in ways that also reinforced loyalty to her leadership. The results were remarkable. Communities under Berengaria's rule maintained higher survival rates during winter than populations governed by other rulers. More importantly, they emerged from winter months with stronger social bonds and greater commitment to collective goals. Berengaria had discovered that addressing psychological needs during crisis periods created political loyalty that lasted for years. Her approach to winter governance attracted the most talented people from across medieval Europe. Artists, scholars, and spiritual leaders would deliberately choose to spend winter months at Berengaria's court because her programs provided opportunities for creative and intellectual development that were impossible elsewhere. This influx of talent enhanced her cultural influence throughout the medieval world. But Berengaria's winter innovations extended far beyond just entertainment and mental health support. She developed economic strategies that turned winter hardships into opportunities for long-term prosperity. While other rulers simply tried to survive until spring, Berengaria used winter months for planning and preparation that created advantages lasting throughout the following year. Her winter economic planning sessions became legendary among medieval administrators. She would gather the most brilliant minds available and spend months analyzing every aspect of her kingdom's resources, identifying inefficiencies, and developing improvement strategies. These intensive planning periods produced innovations that transformed medieval economic management. Berengaria understood that winter provided uninterrupted time for complex problem-solving that was impossible during busy summer seasons. She used this time to redesign tax systems, reorganize trade relationships, and develop new approaches to resource management that increased prosperity throughout her territories. The mathematical sophistication of Berengaria's economic planning was extraordinary for the medieval period. She could calculate complex resource allocation problems, factor in variables like population growth and climate patterns, and develop long-term strategies that balanced immediate needs with future opportunities. Her success proved that medieval queens possessed analytical capabilities that modern historians have consistently underestimated. These winter planning sessions also became training grounds for the next generation of administrators and leaders. Young nobles would compete for opportunities to participate in Berengaria's economic discussions, knowing that the knowledge gained would provide enormous advantages throughout their careers. Her winter court became an informal university that produced some of medieval Europe's most capable leaders. Now we're ready to meet our final queen, whose winter mastery was so complete that she literally changed how medieval Europe understood the relationship between seasons and power. But first, you need to understand something crucial about medieval winter that connects all these remarkable women together. The connection between all these remarkable queens wasn't just their individual brilliance or their ability to survive harsh conditions. What united Margaret, Eleanor, Matilda, and Berengaria was their understanding that winter represented the ultimate test of medieval leadership. They recognized that when survival itself was uncertain, when normal social structures broke down, when people were forced to depend entirely on their rulers for protection, that's when true power could be consolidated or lost forever. Medieval winter was democracy's worst nightmare and autocracy's greatest opportunity. When crops failed and stored food ran low, when travel became impossible and communication networks collapsed, when disease spread through overcrowded castles and cold weather killed the weak. People didn't care about political theory or noble bloodlines. They cared about one thing: who could keep them alive until spring. This created opportunities for extraordinary leaders that simply didn't exist during prosperous times. A queen who could manage resources effectively, maintain morale during desperate conditions, and demonstrate competence when everything was falling apart, could earn loyalty that would last for decades. But failure during winter meant more than political embarrassment. It meant death for thousands of people and the complete destruction of royal authority. Our fifth and final queen understood this dynamic better than anyone who came before her. Blanche of Castile, who ruled from 1188 to 1252, developed winter leadership strategies that were so comprehensive and effective that they became the standard for European governance for centuries. But her approach was different from all the others because she recognized that winter mastery required integration of every aspect of medieval rule. Where Margaret focused on intellectual development, Eleanor on mobility and psychological warfare, Matilda on military innovation, and Berengaria on economic and spiritual leadership, Blanche created systems that combined all these approaches into a unified winter governance philosophy. She understood that medieval winter was too complex and dangerous to be mastered through any single strategy, no matter how brilliant. Blanche faced challenges that would have destroyed any of her predecessors. She ruled during a period when climate change was making European winters longer and more severe than they had been for centuries. The medieval warm period was ending, and the Little Ice Age was beginning. Winters that had once lasted 4 months now stretched for 6 or 7 months, creating survival challenges that previous generations had never experienced. At the same time, European populations were growing rapidly, putting unprecedented pressure on food supplies and resources. More people meant that winter famines could kill hundreds of thousands instead of just thousands. The mathematical calculations required for successful winter governance were becoming exponentially more complex, and the margin for error was shrinking to almost nothing. Blanche also ruled during a time when military technology was advancing rapidly. New siege engines, improved armor, and more effective weapons meant that winter warfare was becoming more deadly and unpredictable. The military strategies that had worked for earlier queens were becoming obsolete, requiring completely new approaches to winter defense and conquest. But perhaps most challenging of all, Blanche ruled during a period of intense religious and political upheaval. The Crusades were reshaping European politics, creating new alliances and enemies that changed constantly. Religious movements were challenging traditional authority structures. Political theories were evolving in ways that questioned the divine right of queens to rule. Winter governance had to account for ideological conflicts that earlier generations had never faced. Blanche's response to these challenges was to create what historians now recognize as the first comprehensive winter governance system in European history. Instead of focusing on individual aspects of winter rule like her predecessors, she developed integrated approaches that addressed every major challenge simultaneously. Her system began with what she called winter preparation protocols that started immediately after each spring planting. While other rulers waited until autumn to begin winter planning, Blanche understood that successful winter governance required year-round preparation. Her administrators spent every season gathering information, stockpiling resources, and developing contingency plans for different winter scenarios. These preparation protocols were incredibly sophisticated. Blanche's officials calculated not just how much food would be needed for basic survival, but how much extra would be required for different population growth rates, various weather severity levels, and potential military conflicts. They factored in variables like disease outbreaks, refugee populations, and trade disruptions that could dramatically alter resource needs. The mathematical complexity of these calculations was extraordinary for the medieval period. Blanche's administrators were essentially creating early economic models that predicted resource needs months in advance. They had to account for uncertainty in ways that modern economists would recognize as sophisticated risk management techniques. But Blanche's winter preparation went far beyond just resource management. She developed comprehensive training programs that prepared her entire administration for winter governance challenges. Officials learned specialized skills in cold weather logistics, crisis communication, and emergency decision-making. By the time winter arrived, Blanche's government was ready to function effectively under conditions that would paralyze other administrations. Her training programs also included psychological preparation that helped officials maintain effectiveness during the mental health challenges of medieval winter. Administrators learned techniques for managing stress, maintaining morale, and making rational decisions under extreme pressure. These psychological skills were crucial because winter governance required sustained high performance during months of darkness and isolation. Blanche also pioneered communication systems that allowed effective governance, even when normal travel became impossible. She established networks of signal fires, messenger routes, and information relay systems that could function during the worst winter weather. Her communication networks were so reliable that she could coordinate complex operations across vast territories, even during severe blizzards. These communication innovations required engineering expertise that was decades ahead of its time. Blanche's engineers had to design signal systems that would work in high winds, heavy snow, and extreme cold. They developed techniques for preserving messages, protecting communication equipment, and maintaining relay stations under conditions that destroyed conventional infrastructure. The effectiveness of Blanche's communication systems gave her enormous advantages over rivals who were essentially cut off from their territories during winter months. She could respond to crises immediately, coordinate military operations across multiple fronts, and maintain political control even when physical travel was impossible. Her enemies often discovered that Blanche knew about their winter activities before they had completed them. But perhaps Blanche's most innovative contribution to winter governance was her development of what we might recognize today as early social safety nets. She understood that winter survival depended not just on adequate resources, but on fair distribution systems that maintained social stability during crisis periods. Blanche created comprehensive programs that provided support for the most vulnerable members of society during winter months. These weren't just charitable activities. They were sophisticated social policies designed to prevent the unrest and desperation that could destroy kingdoms during harsh conditions. Her programs provided food, shelter, medical care, and even entertainment for people who otherwise would have died or become desperate enough to revolt. The social programs required administrative capabilities that were unprecedented in medieval Europe. Blanche's officials had to identify vulnerable populations, assess their needs, coordinate resource distribution, and monitor program effectiveness across vast territories during the most challenging season of the year. The logistical complexity was enormous, but the political benefits were even greater. These social safety nets created loyalty that went far beyond normal political relationships. People who had been saved from winter death by Blanche's programs became devoted supporters who would defend her rule against any challenge. This loyalty was particularly valuable because it came from common people whose support was often more reliable than noble alliances. Blanche's comprehensive winter governance system also included cultural and educational components that built on Berengaria's earlier innovations. She understood that winter was when people had time for learning and cultural development that was impossible during busy agricultural seasons. Her winter programs included educational opportunities, artistic projects, and cultural events that enriched people's lives while reinforcing political loyalty. But Blanche took cultural winter programming much further than her predecessors. She established what were essentially early universities that operated specifically during winter months. These institutions brought together the most brilliant minds in Europe for intensive study periods that produced innovations in science, philosophy, and technology. The knowledge generated during Blanche's winter universities influenced European intellectual development for centuries. The educational programs weren't limited to elite scholars. Blanche created learning opportunities for people from all social classes, including peasants who normally had no access to formal education. These programs produced a more educated population that was better equipped to contribute to economic and social development throughout the year. Her cultural programs also served important diplomatic functions. Foreign nobles and scholars who participated in Blanche's winter universities became informal ambassadors who spread her influence throughout Europe. The intellectual and cultural superiority of her winter courts attracted talent from across the continent, creating networks of influence that enhanced her political power. Blanche's military innovations built on Matilda's earlier breakthroughs, but incorporated new technologies and strategies that reflected changing medieval warfare. She developed winter military capabilities that could operate effectively in the increasingly severe weather conditions of the early Little Ice Age. Her forces were trained not just for traditional winter warfare, but for the extreme conditions that were becoming more common. Her military engineers developed new siege technologies specifically designed for the longer and more severe winters of her era. They created heating systems that allowed siege equipment to function in temperatures that would freeze conventional machinery. They invented new fortification techniques that could withstand both military attacks and extreme weather conditions. But Blanche's most important military innovation was her development of winter supply chains that could support extended military operations during the harshest conditions. She created logistics networks that could deliver food, weapons, and equipment to armies operating in weather that made traditional supply methods impossible. These capabilities gave her military forces strategic advantages that were decisive in numerous conflicts. The integration of all these different systems, social, economic, military, cultural, communication, and administrative, created winter governance capabilities that were centuries ahead of their time. Blanche could maintain effective rule during conditions that would have been considered impossible by earlier generations. Her comprehensive approach to winter leadership became the model that European rulers attempted to copy for centuries. But Blanche's most remarkable achievement was her understanding that winter governance wasn't just about surviving harsh conditions. It was about using those conditions to create stronger and more prosperous societies. She recognized that the challenges of winter could forge social bonds, develop capabilities, and create innovations that would benefit her kingdoms throughout the year. Her winter programs deliberately created situations where people from different social classes had to work together for survival. These experiences broke down traditional barriers and created more cohesive communities that were better equipped to handle future challenges. The social capital built during winter months became a permanent asset that strengthened her entire kingdom. Blanche also used winter challenges as opportunities to identify and develop leadership talent throughout her territories. People who demonstrated competence during winter crises were promoted to positions of greater responsibility. This created a meritocratic system that placed the most capable individuals in positions where they could contribute most effectively to governance. The long-term effects of Blanche's winter governance system were extraordinary. Her kingdoms became more prosperous, more stable, and more innovative than territories ruled by conventional methods. The capabilities developed during winter months created competitive advantages that lasted throughout the year and accumulated over time. Her success attracted attention from rulers throughout Europe and beyond. Diplomatic missions came from as far away as the Middle East and North Africa to study Blanche's winter governance methods. Her innovations influenced political development across multiple continents and established principles that remained relevant for centuries. The chronicles describing Blanche's winter courts reveal administrative sophistication that seems impossible for the medieval period. They describe resource management systems that functioned with mathematical precision, communication networks that operated reliably in the worst weather, and social programs that maintained stability during conditions that destroyed other kingdoms. These accounts weren't exaggerated. Archaeological evidence confirms that Blanche's territories maintained higher population densities, better nutrition levels, and more advanced infrastructure than comparable regions ruled by conventional methods. Her winter governance innovations produced measurable improvements in quality of life that lasted long after her death. But perhaps most importantly, Blanche's comprehensive approach to winter leadership proved that medieval queens possessed intellectual capabilities that have been consistently underestimated by historians. Her ability to integrate complex systems, manage multiple variables simultaneously, and develop innovative solutions to unprecedented challenges demonstrated analytical skills that would be impressive by modern standards. The mathematical sophistication required for her resource management systems, the engineering expertise needed for her communication networks, the psychological insight necessary for her social programs, and the strategic intelligence demanded by her military innovations, all combine to create a leadership profile that challenges basic assumptions about medieval capabilities. Blanche's legacy influenced European governance for centuries after her death. Her integrated approach to winter leadership became the foundation for administrative systems that evolved into modern governmental structures. The principles she developed for crisis management, resource allocation, and social coordination remained relevant throughout the development of European civilization. Her success also established new expectations for female leadership that influenced political development throughout Europe. After Blanche, the idea that women could possess superior administrative and strategic capabilities became accepted in ways that had been impossible before her reign. She had proven that gender was irrelevant to governmental excellence. The story of these 5 remarkable queens reveals something profound about medieval winter that connects directly to our understanding of leadership under extreme conditions. Margaret, Eleanor, Matilda, Berengaria, and Blanche didn't just survive medieval winter, they transformed it from humanity's greatest seasonal challenge into an opportunity for demonstrating capabilities that would have been impossible under normal conditions. Their combined innovations in winter governance created administrative, military, economic, social, and cultural systems that influenced European development for centuries. They proved that extreme conditions don't just test existing capabilities, they create opportunities for developing new ones that can transform entire civilizations. But there's one more aspect of their winter mastery that we need to explore. Something that connects their individual achievements to broader patterns of human excellence that remain relevant today. These queens understood something about the relationship between challenge and growth that modern leadership theory is only beginning to rediscover. Each of these queens discovered that winter's greatest gift wasn't just the opportunity to demonstrate strength under pressure, but the chance to develop entirely new forms of human capability that would have been impossible during easier times. When survival depends on innovation, when traditional methods fail completely, When the margin for error disappears entirely, that's when breakthrough thinking becomes not just possible, but necessary. Think about what this means for understanding medieval society. We've been taught to view the Middle Ages as a time of limited human potential, when people were supposedly less intelligent, less capable, less innovative than modern populations. But the winter achievements of these queens prove exactly the opposite. They developed administrative systems, military technologies, economic theories, and social programs that were centuries ahead of their time. The reason we've missed this historical reality is that we've focused on summer achievements while ignoring winter innovations. Medieval chroniclers wrote most of their accounts during pleasant weather when travel was easy and communication was reliable. The extraordinary developments happening during winter months were often recorded only in scattered documents that historians have overlooked or dismissed as exaggerations. But archaeological evidence confirms that these winter innovations were absolutely real. Excavations of medieval sites reveal heating systems, storage facilities, communication networks, and defensive structures that demonstrate technological sophistication far beyond what traditional historical accounts suggest. These queens weren't just surviving winter, they were engineering solutions to complex problems using principles that wouldn't be formally understood for centuries. Margaret's intellectual winter courts produced mathematical and scientific insights that influenced European thought for generations. The scholars who gathered at her castle during harsh months weren't just keeping themselves entertained, they were developing new approaches to astronomy, medicine, engineering, and philosophy. The knowledge created during those winter sessions became the foundation for later medieval universities and scholarly traditions. Eleanor's mobile winter courts required logistics capabilities that seem impossible by medieval standards. Moving hundreds of people with all their supplies and equipment across frozen landscapes in the middle of blizzards demanded coordination skills that would challenge modern military organizations. Her ability to appear anywhere in her territories during the worst weather proved she had mastered transportation and communication technologies that historians are only beginning to understand. Matilda's winter warfare innovations involved engineering principles that wouldn't be formally recognized until the Renaissance. Her siege techniques using ice and frozen water required understanding of structural mechanics, thermodynamics, and material science that was supposedly unknown in medieval Europe. Her success proves that practical engineering knowledge was far more advanced than theoretical scientific writing would suggest. Berengaria's psychological and economic winter programs demonstrated understanding of human behavior that predated modern social science by centuries. Her ability to maintain population morale during extended periods of darkness and isolation required insights into mental health, social dynamics, and economic motivation that wouldn't be systematically studied until much later historical periods. Blanche's comprehensive winter governance system integrated all these innovations into administrative structures that functioned with efficiency that would impress modern bureaucrats. Her ability to coordinate complex operations across vast territories during the most challenging conditions imaginable required organizational capabilities that challenge basic assumptions about medieval governmental competence. The mathematical sophistication underlying all these achievements is particularly remarkable. These queens had to calculate resource needs, population dynamics, weather probabilities, military logistics, and economic variables using mental arithmetic and simple tools. They were essentially creating early computer models in their heads, processing information and making decisions that required analytical capabilities we associate with much later historical periods. Their success also reveals something crucial about medieval women that contradicts centuries of historical assumptions. These queens weren't exceptional because they somehow transcended normal female limitations of their era. They were exceptional because they demonstrated capabilities that were probably much more common among medieval women than traditional accounts suggest. The reason we know so much about these particular queens is that their winter achievements were so dramatic they couldn't be ignored by male chroniclers who normally overlooked female accomplishments. But if 5 women could develop such extraordinary winter leadership capabilities, How many others possess similar potential that was never recorded because their achievements weren't quite dramatic enough to force male attention? Medieval winter created conditions where traditional gender restrictions became irrelevant to survival, when everyone's life depended on effective leadership, when conventional social structures collapsed under extreme pressure, when innovation became essential for avoiding death. Capabilities mattered more than social expectations. Winter was the great equalizer that revealed human potential regardless of gender. This suggests that medieval society possessed far greater human resources than we've traditionally recognized. The intellectual, organizational, and innovative capabilities demonstrated by these winter queens were probably representative of much broader populations that history has overlooked. We've been dramatically underestimating medieval human potential because we've focused on formal institutions rather than crisis-driven innovations. The economic implications of these winter innovations were enormous and long-lasting. The administrative systems, agricultural techniques, trade networks, and resource management methods developed by these queens created prosperity that extended far beyond their individual reigns. Their winter governance innovations became the foundation for economic growth that influenced European development for centuries. Consider the ripple effects of just one example. Blanche's comprehensive food storage and distribution systems didn't just prevent winter famines during her reign, they created agricultural and economic infrastructure that supported larger populations and more complex societies throughout her territories. The mathematical precision of her resource calculations enabled population growth that wouldn't have been possible under conventional medieval governance. Her communication networks didn't just allow effective winter administration, they created information systems that enhanced trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange throughout the year. The engineering innovations required for winter communication led to transportation improvements that increased economic productivity across multiple sectors. Her social programs didn't just prevent winter unrest, they created educational and cultural opportunities that developed human capital throughout her kingdoms. The skills and knowledge gained during winter programs enhanced economic capabilities that generated prosperity for generations. The military innovations of these queens had similarly profound long-term effects. Their winter warfare techniques didn't just win individual battles, they changed the strategic balance of power throughout medieval Europe. Enemies who couldn't match their winter military capabilities found themselves at permanent disadvantages that influenced political relationships for decades. The psychological warfare aspects were particularly important. Once these queens established reputations for winter invincibility, their enemies often surrendered or negotiated rather than face winter conflicts they knew they couldn't win. This psychological dominance reduced the actual warfare required to maintain power, creating more stable and prosperous conditions throughout their territories. Their winter intelligence networks didn't just provide military advantages, they created information systems that enhanced economic and diplomatic decision-making throughout the year. The knowledge gathered during winter months informed policies and strategies that increased governmental effectiveness across all areas of administration. The cultural and intellectual achievements of these winter courts influenced European development in ways that extended far beyond their immediate political impact. The artistic innovations, scientific discoveries, and philosophical insights generated during winter sessions became part of the intellectual foundation for later medieval and Renaissance achievements. Margaret's winter intellectual gatherings established traditions of scholarly inquiry that influenced the development of medieval universities. The mathematical and scientific knowledge developed at her court contributed to advances in astronomy, medicine, and engineering that enhanced European technological capabilities for centuries. Eleanor's cultural warfare programs created artistic and literary traditions that shaped European aesthetic development throughout the medieval period. The romantic poetry and musical innovations that emerged from her winter courts influenced cultural expression across multiple countries and social classes. Berengaria's winter psychological programs established principles of mental health and social support that were centuries ahead of their time. Her understanding of human behavior during crisis conditions contributed to knowledge that remained relevant throughout the development of European social institutions. Blanche's comprehensive cultural and educational systems created intellectual infrastructure that supported European scholarly development for generations. Her winter universities produced knowledge and trained leaders who contributed to advances in multiple fields of human understanding. The technological innovations required for these winter achievements also had broad implications for European development. The engineering solutions, communication systems, transportation methods, and construction techniques developed by these queens created technological foundations that influenced infrastructure development throughout medieval Europe. Their heating systems, food preservation methods, and cold weather construction techniques improved quality of life for entire populations. The engineering principles they discovered through practical necessity became part of the technological knowledge base that supported European economic and social development. Their military technologies influenced warfare throughout Europe and beyond. The siege techniques, fortification methods, and logistics systems they developed were studied and copied by military leaders across multiple countries and time periods. Their communication innovations created information networks that enhanced trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange throughout medieval Europe. The signal systems, messenger routes, and information management techniques they pioneered established principles that remained relevant throughout the development of European governmental and commercial systems. But perhaps the most important long-term impact of these winter queens was their demonstration that extreme challenges could be transformed into opportunities for unprecedented human achievement. They proved that harsh conditions don't just test existing capabilities, they create possibilities for developing new ones that can transform entire civilizations. Their success established a model for crisis leadership that remained relevant throughout European history. During later periods of extreme challenge, wars, famines, plagues, and political upheavals, leaders could look back to these winter queens for examples of how exceptional circumstances could be used to create extraordinary achievements. Their integrated approach to governance under extreme conditions became a template for comprehensive crisis management that influenced political development throughout Europe. The principles they established for coordinating multiple systems simultaneously, managing complex variables under pressure, and maintaining long-term vision during immediate crises remained relevant throughout the evolution of European governmental institutions. Their demonstration that women could possess superior administrative, military, and strategic capabilities challenged gender assumptions that had persisted for centuries. After their reigns, the idea that female leadership might be especially effective during crisis conditions became accepted in ways that influenced political development throughout medieval Europe. The mathematical and analytical capabilities they demonstrated established new expectations for governmental competence that raised standards for leadership throughout Europe. Their success proved that effective governance required intellectual capabilities that went far beyond traditional noble qualifications based on birth or military prowess. Their innovations in social policy, economic management, and cultural development created models for comprehensive governmental responsibility that influenced the evolution of European political institutions. They demonstrated that effective leadership required attention to all aspects of human welfare, not just military and political control. The winter mastery of these 5 queens reveals something profound about human potential under extreme conditions. When survival depends on innovation, when traditional methods fail completely, when the margin for error disappears entirely, that's when breakthrough thinking becomes not just possible, but essential. Their achievements prove that medieval society possessed intellectual, organizational, and innovative capabilities that have been consistently underestimated by historians focusing on formal institutions rather than crisis-driven developments. The sophistication of their winter governance systems challenges basic assumptions about medieval human potential. Their success also demonstrates that extreme challenges can create opportunities for developing capabilities that would be impossible under normal conditions. The integration of multiple complex systems, the coordination of vast resources under pressure, and the development of innovative solutions to unprecedented problems all became possible because winter conditions made them necessary for survival. Modern leadership theory is only beginning to understand principles that these medieval queens mastered through practical necessity. Their ability to maintain effectiveness under extreme pressure, coordinate complex operations during crisis conditions, and develop innovative solutions to unprecedented challenges establish models for crisis leadership that remain relevant today. Their winter achievements also reveal the importance of comprehensive preparation for managing extreme conditions. Their year-round planning, systematic resource management, and integrated approach to multiple challenges simultaneously created capabilities that enabled not just survival, but transformation of harsh conditions into opportunities for advancement. The legacy of these winter queens extends far beyond medieval history. Their innovations in crisis management, their demonstration of human potential under extreme conditions, and their proof that comprehensive leadership can transform challenges into opportunities, establish principles that influenced human development throughout subsequent centuries. Their story reveals that the relationship between challenge and human achievement is more complex and positive than we often recognize. Rather than simply testing existing capabilities, extreme conditions can create possibilities for developing new ones that transform not just individual lives, but entire civilizations. The winter mastery of Margaret, Eleanor, Matilda, Berengaria, and Blanche proves that medieval women possessed extraordinary capabilities that have been overlooked by traditional historical accounts. Their achievements challenge assumptions about both medieval society and female potential that have persisted for centuries. But their story also reveals something universal about human nature and the relationship between adversity and excellence. When conditions become extreme enough to make innovation essential for survival, when traditional methods prove completely inadequate, when the stakes become high enough to demand breakthrough thinking, that's when human capabilities can transcend normal limitations and achieve results that seem impossible under ordinary circumstances. These 5 queens transformed medieval winter from humanity's greatest seasonal challenge into an opportunity for demonstrating leadership excellence that influenced European development for centuries. Their legacy proves that extreme conditions don't just reveal existing strength, they create possibilities for developing new forms of human capability that can change the course of history. Their understanding of winter as a transformative force, rather than simply an obstacle to endure, represents one of the most sophisticated approaches to seasonal governance in human history. But there's something even more remarkable about how these queens approach the psychological dimensions of winter rule that reveals advanced understanding of human nature under extreme stress. Modern research into seasonal affective disorders and winter depression confirms what these medieval queens understood intuitively centuries ago. The combination of darkness, isolation, and survival anxiety creates mental health challenges that can destroy individuals and entire communities. But instead of simply acknowledging this reality, these queens developed systematic approaches to winter psychology that turned potential weaknesses into sources of strength. Consider the mathematical precision required for their psychological interventions. They had to calculate not just physical resource needs, but emotional and spiritual requirements for maintaining population morale during months of darkness. They understood that human beings need more than food and shelter to survive. They need hope, purpose, and social connection to maintain the psychological resilience necessary for enduring extreme hardship. Their winter courts became laboratories for studying human behavior under pressure. They could observe exactly how different personality types responded to isolation, how social hierarchies shifted during crisis conditions, and how cultural activities could be used to maintain mental stability when external circumstances became unbearable. This psychological intelligence was crucial for another reason that most people never consider: Medieval winter wasn't just about surviving until spring. It was about maintaining the social cohesion necessary for effective governance when normal conditions returned. A population that had been psychologically damaged by winter hardship would be unable to participate effectively in spring agricultural work, summer military campaigns, or autumn harvest activities. The queens who mastered winter psychology understood that their seasonal leadership had year-round implications. Communities that emerged from winter with strong morale and intact social bonds would be more productive, more loyal, and more capable throughout the following year. This created cumulative advantages that grew stronger over time. Their approach to winter entertainment reveals sophisticated understanding of human psychology that predates modern therapeutic techniques by centuries. They didn't just provide random distractions during dark months, they carefully designed activities that served specific psychological functions. Musical performances provided emotional catharsis. Storytelling competitions maintained verbal skills and cultural memory. Artistic projects gave people creative outlets that helped process the stress of survival anxiety. But perhaps most importantly, these activities created shared experiences that bonded communities together during the most challenging time of year. People who had survived winter hardships together, who had supported each other through months of darkness and uncertainty, developed loyalty relationships that lasted for decades. This social capital became one of the most valuable resources these queens possessed. The economic sophistication of their winter planning reveals mathematical capabilities that challenge our understanding of medieval intellectual development. These queens had to calculate resource needs for variable population sizes, uncertain weather conditions, and unpredictable external threats. They were essentially creating early economic models that factored in probability distributions and risk management principles that wouldn't be formally recognized for centuries. Their food storage calculations alone required extraordinary precision. They had to estimate not just basic caloric needs, but additional requirements for different activity levels, age demographics, and health conditions. They had to account for spoilage rates under various storage conditions, distribution logistics across difficult terrain, and reserve requirements for unexpected emergencies. The complexity increases dramatically when you consider that they were making these calculations for entire kingdoms. Blanche's territories contained hundreds of thousands of people, spread across vast geographic areas with different climate conditions, agricultural capabilities, and strategic vulnerabilities. Her ability to coordinate resource management across such complexity using medieval calculation methods demonstrates intellectual capabilities that seem impossible by traditional historical standards. Their military logistics reveal similarly advanced mathematical thinking. Moving armies during winter required calculating not just basic supply needs, but fuel requirements for heating, equipment maintenance under extreme conditions, and medical supplies for cold weather injuries. They had to factor in variables like animal mortality rates, equipment failure probabilities, and weather-related delays that could disrupt entire campaigns. The engineering innovations required for their winter military operations were centuries ahead of their time. They developed heating systems for siege equipment that functioned in temperatures that would freeze conventional machinery. They invented new construction techniques that could create temporary fortifications in frozen ground. They pioneered transportation methods that could move heavy equipment across snow and ice that would stop normal medieval logistics. But their greatest engineering achievement was probably their communication systems. Maintaining reliable information networks during winter storms required signal technologies that could function in high winds, heavy snow, and extreme cold. They had to design backup systems that would work when primary methods failed, and redundant networks that could route around damaged sections. The geographical scope of these communication systems was extraordinary. Eleanor's network could coordinate operations across territories that stretched from Scotland to the Mediterranean. Messages could travel hundreds of miles during winter storms that made normal travel impossible. This required engineering expertise that wouldn't become common until much later historical periods. Their social engineering was equally sophisticated. These queens understood that winter survival required cooperation levels that went far beyond normal medieval social structures. Traditional hierarchies based on birth or wealth became irrelevant when everyone's survival depended on effective teamwork. They had to create new social systems that could motivate cooperation while maintaining the authority structures necessary for effective governance. This required psychological insight that was centuries ahead of its time. They had to understand human motivation under extreme stress, design incentive systems that would encourage beneficial behavior, and create social frameworks that could adapt to changing conditions while maintaining stability. Their success proves they possessed understanding of group psychology that modern social scientists would recognize as advanced. The cultural implications of their winter innovations extended far beyond their immediate political impact. The intellectual and artistic achievements generated during their winter courts became part of the foundation for later medieval and Renaissance cultural development. The knowledge created during months of intensive study and creative work influenced European thought for generations. Their winter universities established educational principles that remained relevant throughout the development of European scholarly institutions. They demonstrated that intensive study periods could produce insights and innovations that were impossible during normal academic schedules. The concentrated intellectual environment of winter courts created breakthrough thinking that influenced multiple fields of knowledge. The artistic innovations emerging from their winter cultural programs shaped European aesthetic development throughout the medieval period. The musical compositions, literary works, and visual arts created during winter sessions established traditions that influenced cultural expression across multiple countries and social classes. Their diplomatic innovations reveal understanding of international relations that was sophisticated by any historical standard. They recognized that winter negotiations carried different psychological weight than summer discussions. When diplomats had to risk dangerous travel just to participate in discussions, when agreements were reached while everyone was isolated together during harsh conditions, the resulting treaties carried emotional significance that made them more durable than conventional diplomatic arrangements. Their winter diplomatic receptions became legendary throughout medieval Europe. Foreign ambassadors would describe arriving during blizzards to find courts that functioned with luxury and efficiency that seemed impossible under such conditions. The psychological impact was enormous, demonstrating capabilities that enhanced their international reputation and political influence. But perhaps their most important diplomatic innovation was their understanding that winter isolation created opportunities for intensive relationship building that were impossible during busy summer seasons. When people were confined together for months, when survival depended on cooperation, when shared hardships created mutual dependence, the bonds formed were much deeper than normal political relationships. These winter alliances often proved more reliable than conventional diplomatic agreements. Leaders who had survived harsh conditions together, who had demonstrated mutual support during crisis periods, who had shared resources when survival was uncertain, developed trust relationships that lasted throughout their careers. The technological innovations required for their winter achievements created knowledge bases that influenced European development for centuries. The engineering principles discovered through practical necessity, the mathematical techniques developed for resource management, the organizational methods created for crisis coordination, all became part of the intellectual foundation for later medieval and Renaissance advancement. Their heating technologies improved quality of life for entire populations. The insulation methods, fuel efficiency techniques, and heating system designs they developed were studied and copied throughout medieval Europe. Their innovations in cold weather construction influenced architectural development and building techniques that remained relevant for centuries. Their food preservation methods revolutionized medieval nutrition and agricultural planning. The storage techniques, processing methods, and distribution systems they developed allowed larger populations to survive winter months and created agricultural surplus that supported economic growth throughout the year. Their transportation innovations enabled trade and communication during seasons when conventional methods became impossible. The winter travel techniques, equipment modifications, and route planning methods they pioneered established principles that influenced European transportation development for generations. But the most important aspect of their technological legacy was their demonstration that practical necessity could drive innovation that was centuries ahead of formal scientific understanding. They developed solutions to complex engineering problems using intuitive understanding of principles that wouldn't be formally recognized until much later historical periods. Their success proves that medieval society possessed far greater technological capabilities than traditional historical accounts suggest. The sophistication of their winter innovations challenges basic assumptions about medieval intellectual and technical development. The administrative systems they created for winter governance established principles of crisis management that remained relevant throughout European political development. Their ability to coordinate complex operations under extreme pressure, maintain effective communication during difficult conditions, and adapt to changing circumstances while preserving essential functions, created models for governmental competence that influenced institutional development for centuries. Their comprehensive approach to crisis leadership demonstrated that effective governance required integration of multiple systems simultaneously. They couldn't focus on just military defense, or just resource management, or just population morale. Winter survival demanded coordination of all governmental functions at levels of efficiency that would challenge modern administrative capabilities. Their success also established new expectations for governmental responsibility that influenced European political development. They demonstrated that effective leadership required attention to all aspects of human welfare, from basic survival needs to psychological health, cultural development, and spiritual fulfillment. The long-term political implications of their winter mastery were profound. They proved that exceptional leadership during crisis conditions could create loyalty and institutional strength that lasted for generations. Their winter governance innovations became the foundation for political stability that survived dynastic changes, military defeats, and economic upheavals. Their demonstration that comprehensive preparation could transform challenges into opportunities established principles of proactive governance that influenced European political thought for centuries. They showed that effective leadership required not just reactive crisis management, but systematic planning that could anticipate problems and create advantages from difficult conditions. The international influence of their winter innovations extended far beyond medieval Europe. Diplomatic missions came from across the known world to study their governance methods. Their techniques were adapted and implemented in different cultural contexts, creating a global impact that lasted throughout the medieval period and beyond. Their success also influenced gender expectations in ways that had lasting historical significance. They proved that women could possess administrative, military, and strategic capabilities that were superior to male leadership under extreme conditions. This challenged fundamental assumptions about gender roles that had persisted for centuries. After their reigns, the idea that female leadership might be especially effective during crisis conditions became accepted throughout medieval Europe. This created opportunities for women in governance that wouldn't have existed without their groundbreaking achievements. Their legacy also influenced expectations for all medieval leadership, regardless of gender. The standards they set for winter governance competence became benchmarks that later rulers were expected to meet. Their innovations established new definitions of what effective medieval leadership required. The mathematical and analytical capabilities they demonstrated raised expectations for governmental intellectual competence throughout Europe. Their success proved that effective governance required sophisticated calculation abilities, complex systems thinking, and advanced problem-solving skills that went far beyond traditional noble qualifications. Their comprehensive approach to winter leadership created templates for integrated governance that influenced the evolution of European political institutions. They demonstrated that modern governmental challenges required coordination of multiple systems simultaneously, systematic planning capabilities, and adaptive management techniques that could respond to changing conditions while maintaining essential functions. The psychological insights they developed about leadership under extreme pressure remained relevant throughout European history. During later periods of crisis, wars, famines, plagues, and political upheavals, leaders could reference their examples for guidance about maintaining effectiveness when normal conditions collapsed. Their understanding of how extreme conditions could create opportunities for exceptional achievement established principles that influenced European thought about the relationship between challenge and human potential. They proved that harsh circumstances didn't just test existing capabilities, they could create possibilities for developing new ones that transformed entire civilizations. The winter achievements of these 5 queens represent one of the most remarkable examples of human excellence under extreme conditions in recorded history. Their ability to transform medieval Europe's greatest seasonal challenge into an opportunity for demonstrating unprecedented leadership capabilities established models for crisis governance that remained influential for centuries. Their success reveals something profound about the relationship between adversity and human achievement that extends far beyond medieval history. They proved that, when conditions become extreme enough to make innovation essential for survival, when traditional methods prove completely inadequate, when the stakes become high enough to demand breakthrough thinking, human capabilities can transcend normal limitations and achieve results that seem impossible under ordinary circumstances. Their integrated approach to winter governance, combining military innovation, economic sophistication, psychological insight, cultural development, technological advancement, and administrative excellence, created comprehensive leadership models that influenced European development throughout the medieval period and beyond. Their mathematical precision, engineering expertise, organizational capabilities, and strategic intelligence demonstrated intellectual competence that challenges traditional assumptions about medieval human potential. Their achievements prove that historical societies possessed far greater capabilities than formal institutions and written records typically reveal. But perhaps, most importantly, their winter mastery established principles about transforming challenges into opportunities that remain relevant for understanding human potential under extreme conditions. They proved that comprehensive preparation, integrated systems thinking, and innovative problem-solving could convert even the harshest circumstances into foundations for extraordinary achievement. The legacy of Margaret, Eleanor, Matilda, Berengaria, and Blanche extends far beyond their individual reigns or even medieval history. Their demonstration that winter could be transformed from humanity's greatest seasonal challenge into an opportunity for unprecedented human excellence established principles about the relationship between adversity and achievement that continue to influence our understanding of leadership, innovation, and human potential under extreme conditions. Their story proves that when survival depends on breakthrough thinking, when conventional methods fail completely, when the margin for error disappears entirely, that's when human capabilities can transcend normal limitations and create achievements that seem impossible under ordinary circumstances. They transformed medieval winter from an obstacle to endure into a catalyst for developing forms of human excellence that influenced European civilization for centuries. The comprehensive nature of their winter governance innovations, integrating multiple complex systems while maintaining effectiveness under extreme pressure, established models for crisis leadership that remained relevant throughout the evolution of European political institutions. Their success proves that exceptional challenges can create opportunities for developing capabilities that transform not just individual lives, but entire civilizations. Their understanding of winter as a transformative force rather than merely a seasonal obstacle created governance philosophies that influenced medieval political thought for generations. But what makes their achievements even more remarkable is how they understood something that modern crisis management theory is only beginning to rediscover. extreme conditions don't just reveal existing leadership capabilities, they actually create new ones that would be impossible to develop under normal circumstances. Think about the psychological transformation required for this kind of winter leadership. These queens had to maintain peak decision-making abilities while enduring months of darkness, isolation, and constant survival pressure. They had to inspire confidence in others while facing their own fears about whether their people would survive until spring. They had to make complex strategic calculations while dealing with the mental fog and depression that affected everyone during medieval winters. This psychological resilience wasn't just personal strength. It was a learned skill that they developed through systematic preparation and practice. Each of these queens understood that winter leadership required different mental capabilities than summer governance, and they trained themselves accordingly. They developed meditation practices, intellectual exercises, and social rituals that maintained their cognitive abilities during the most challenging months. Their approach to winter decision-making reveals sophisticated understanding of psychology under pressure that was centuries ahead of its time. They recognized that stress and survival anxiety could cloud judgment, so they created decision-making frameworks that accounted for these psychological factors. They established advisory councils specifically designed to provide clear thinking during crisis conditions, and they developed protocols for making rational choices when emotions were running high. The results were extraordinary. While other rulers made increasingly desperate and irrational decisions as winter pressures mounted, these queens maintained strategic clarity that allowed them to identify opportunities that others missed completely. They could see long-term implications when everyone else was focused on immediate survival. And they could recognize patterns and connections that became invisible to leaders operating under extreme stress. Their ability to maintain this psychological clarity during winter months gave them enormous advantages in spring negotiations and summer campaigns. Enemies who had made poor decisions during winter desperation found themselves facing queens who had used the harsh months for careful planning and strategic preparation. The psychological advantages gained during winter often proved more decisive than military or economic superiority. But their winter psychological mastery extended far beyond just personal resilience. They understood that maintaining population morale during dark months required sophisticated understanding of group psychology and mass communication techniques that wouldn't be formally studied for centuries. They had to inspire hope in people who were watching friends and family members die from cold, hunger, and disease. They had to maintain social cohesion when survival instincts were driving people toward desperate selfishness. Their methods for managing population psychology during winter reveal insights into human nature that were extraordinarily advanced. They understood that people needed not just physical survival, but psychological meaning to endure extreme hardship. They created narratives about winter challenges that transformed suffering from meaningless misery into heroic endurance that would be rewarded when better times returned. These psychological narratives weren't just propaganda, they were sophisticated therapeutic interventions that helped people maintain mental health during conditions that could easily cause complete psychological breakdown. They provided frameworks for understanding hardship that preserved human dignity and hope, even when circumstances seemed hopeless. The winter storytelling traditions that emerged from their courts served multiple psychological functions simultaneously. They preserved cultural memory during months when normal educational activities were impossible. They provided entertainment that distracted from immediate hardships. They reinforced social values that encouraged cooperation and mutual support. Most importantly, they created shared experiences that bonded communities together during the most isolating time of year. Their understanding of how winter isolation affected human psychology led to innovations in social organization that were centuries ahead of their time. They recognized that traditional medieval social hierarchies could become counterproductive during survival conditions when cooperation was more important than status distinctions. They created temporary social structures that preserved essential authority while encouraging the mutual dependence necessary for group survival. These winter social innovations required extraordinary diplomatic skills because they had to modify established power relationships without threatening the fundamental political structures that maintained their authority. They had to convince nobles to accept temporary status changes, while ensuring that normal hierarchies would be restored when winter ended. This required psychological insight and political sophistication that would challenge modern leadership experts. The economic implications of their winter psychological mastery were profound and long-lasting. Populations that maintained high morale during winter months were more productive throughout the following year. Communities that emerged from harsh conditions with intact social bonds could coordinate agricultural, military, and commercial activities more effectively than societies that had been psychologically damaged by winter hardship. Their success in maintaining population psychology during extreme conditions created cumulative economic advantages that grew stronger over time. Territories that could rely on high morale and social cooperation during crisis periods attracted trade, immigration, and investment that enhanced prosperity for decades. Their psychological innovations during winter months created social capital that generated economic returns throughout the year. Their approach to winter education reveals another dimension of their psychological sophistication. They understood that harsh conditions created unique learning opportunities that were impossible during comfortable times. When people were confined together for months, when survival depended on acquiring new skills quickly, when traditional activities were impossible, that's when intensive education could produce breakthrough learning that would benefit communities for generations. Their winter educational programs weren't just about keeping people occupied during dark months. They were systematic efforts to use enforced isolation for developing human capabilities that would enhance economic and social productivity throughout the year. They taught mathematical skills needed for resource management, engineering techniques required for construction and repair, medical knowledge essential for treating cold weather injuries, and strategic thinking necessary for effective planning. But perhaps most importantly, they used winter months for developing leadership capabilities throughout their populations. They identified people who demonstrated competence during crisis conditions and provided them with intensive training in governance, diplomacy, military strategy, and economic management. These winter leadership development programs created administrative capabilities that strengthened their governments for decades. The technological innovations emerging from their winter educational programs were extraordinary by medieval standards. When people were confined together with limited resources and unlimited time, when survival depended on solving practical problems creatively, when traditional tools and methods proved inadequate, that's when breakthrough innovations became possible. Their winter courts became research laboratories that produced engineering solutions, agricultural techniques, and manufacturing methods that were decades ahead of their time. Their winter innovations in heating technology revolutionized medieval architecture and construction. They developed insulation methods, ventilation systems, and fuel efficiency techniques that improved quality of life throughout their territories. These innovations spread to other regions and influenced building practices across medieval Europe, creating lasting improvements in winter survival capabilities. Their food preservation and processing innovations transformed medieval nutrition and agricultural planning. They developed storage techniques that reduced spoilage, processing methods that enhanced nutritional value, and distribution systems that ensured more equitable food allocation during harsh months. These innovations supported larger populations and created agricultural surplus that funded economic growth throughout the year. Their medical innovations during winter months advanced medieval healthcare in ways that saved countless lives. They developed treatments for cold weather injuries, nutritional therapies for winter-related illnesses, and psychological interventions for seasonal depression. Their understanding of how extreme conditions affected human health was centuries ahead of formal medical knowledge. Their military technological innovations transformed medieval warfare and influenced strategic thinking throughout Europe. The siege equipment Fortification methods and logistic systems they developed during winter campaigns created military advantages that lasted throughout the year. Their innovations in cold weather combat influenced military doctrine for generations and established new standards for winter warfare capabilities. But their most important technological legacy was their demonstration that extreme conditions could accelerate innovation in ways that comfortable circumstances never could. They proved that when survival depended on solving complex problems quickly, when traditional methods failed completely, when creative thinking became essential for avoiding disaster, human ingenuity could produce breakthrough solutions that seemed impossible under normal conditions. Their winter innovation laboratories attracted the most brilliant minds from across medieval Europe. Scholars, engineers, artists, and inventors would deliberately choose to spend harsh months at their courts because the intensive problem-solving environment produced insights and discoveries that were impossible elsewhere. This influx of talent created intellectual communities that influenced European development for centuries. The mathematical sophistication required for coordinating these multiple winter innovations simultaneously reveals analytical capabilities that seem impossible by traditional medieval standards. These queens had to calculate resource allocations for educational programs, technological research, military preparations, and population support, all while managing the basic survival needs of entire kingdoms during the most challenging season of the year. Their ability to balance these competing demands while maintaining effectiveness in all areas required intellectual capabilities that would challenge modern administrators with access to computers and advanced analytical tools. They were essentially creating comprehensive management systems in their heads, processing enormous amounts of information and making decisions that affected hundreds of thousands of people during life or death conditions. Their success proves that medieval society possessed intellectual resources that have been consistently underestimated by historians, focusing on formal educational institutions rather than practical problem-solving capabilities. These queens developed mathematical, engineering, psychological, and strategic thinking skills through necessity that were far more advanced than the theoretical knowledge preserved in medieval academic writings. Their winter governance systems also reveal sophisticated understanding of information management and communication that predated modern administrative techniques by centuries. They had to coordinate complex operations across vast territories while maintaining reliable information flow during conditions that made normal communication impossible. This required developing encoding systems, redundant message routes, and verification protocols that ensured accurate information transmission when errors could mean death for thousands of people. Their communication innovations during winter months created information networks that enhanced governance effectiveness throughout the year. The signal systems, messenger routes, and information processing methods they developed remained operational during all seasons, providing communication capabilities that gave them decisive advantages over rivals who relied on conventional medieval communication methods. Their understanding of how information flow affected organizational effectiveness was centuries ahead of its time. They recognized that timely, accurate information was essential for effective decision-making, and they created systems that provided reliable intelligence even during the most challenging conditions. Their information management innovations influenced governmental and commercial communication throughout medieval Europe. The diplomatic implications of their winter governance mastery extended far beyond their immediate territories. Their reputation for maintaining effective rule during extreme conditions attracted international attention and enhanced their influence in medieval European politics. Foreign rulers sought their advice about crisis management, creating diplomatic relationships that enhanced their international standing. Their winter diplomatic innovations created new protocols for international negotiation that influenced medieval diplomacy for generations. They established precedents for how extreme conditions could be used to test diplomatic commitment, create binding agreements, and forge alliances that would survive normal political pressures. Their diplomatic methods during harsh months became models that were studied and copied throughout medieval Europe. Their success also influenced international trade relationships in ways that enhanced economic prosperity throughout their territories. Merchants and traders recognized that kingdoms capable of maintaining stability during winter months offered more reliable commercial partnerships than territories that experienced seasonal governance failures. This created trade advantages that generated prosperity throughout the year and attracted economic development that lasted for decades. The cultural implications of their winter mastery influenced European artistic and intellectual development in ways that extended far beyond the medieval period. The intensive creative work produced during their winter courts established traditions of seasonal cultural activity that influenced European cultural calendars for centuries. Their innovation in using harsh conditions to accelerate artistic and intellectual development became a model that was adapted throughout European cultural institutions. Their winter cultural programs created new art forms specifically designed for extreme conditions that influenced European aesthetic development. The musical compositions, literary works, and visual arts created during winter isolation established artistic traditions that shaped cultural expression throughout medieval Europe and influenced later Renaissance artistic development. Their educational innovations during winter months established principles of intensive learning that influenced European academic development for centuries. They demonstrated that concentrated study periods under challenging conditions could produce educational results that were impossible during normal academic schedules. Their winter educational methods became models for later European university systems and scholarly institutions. But perhaps their most profound cultural legacy was their demonstration that extreme conditions could become catalysts for exceptional creative achievement. They proved that harsh circumstances didn't just preserve existing cultural traditions, they created possibilities for developing new forms of artistic and intellectual expression that transformed European cultural development. Their comprehensive approach to winter governance created integrated systems that influenced European political development throughout the medieval period and beyond. Their ability to coordinate multiple complex operations simultaneously, maintain effectiveness under extreme pressure, and transform challenges into opportunities for advancement, established models for governmental competence that remained relevant throughout the evolution of European political institutions. Their success challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between environmental conditions and human achievement that had persisted throughout medieval thought. They proved that harsh circumstances could be transformed into advantages through comprehensive preparation, innovative thinking, and integrated systems management. Their winter governance innovations established new paradigms for understanding how extreme conditions could be used to develop exceptional human capabilities. The long-term implications of their winter mastery extended far beyond medieval Europe and influenced human understanding of the relationship between challenge and achievement that remains relevant today. They demonstrated that when conditions become extreme enough to make innovation essential for survival, when traditional methods prove completely inadequate, when the stakes become high enough to demand breakthrough thinking, human capabilities can transcend normal limitations and achieve results that seem impossible under ordinary circumstances. Their legacy proves that comprehensive preparation, systematic innovation, and integrated thinking can transform even the harshest challenges into foundations for extraordinary achievement. They establish principles about crisis leadership, innovation under pressure, and the development of human potential during extreme conditions that continue to influence our understanding of what becomes possible when survival depends on transcending normal limitations. The Winter Queens of medieval Europe transformed humanity's greatest seasonal challenge into an opportunity for demonstrating leadership excellence that influenced civilization for centuries. Their achievements reveal that extreme conditions don't just test existing capabilities, they create possibilities for developing new forms of human excellence that can change the course of history. Their comprehensive mastery of winter governance established models for transforming adversity into advantage that remain relevant for understanding human potential under any extreme conditions. Their story proves that when survival requires innovation, when conventional methods fail completely, when the margin for error disappears entirely, that's when breakthrough thinking becomes not just possible, but essential for success. They transformed medieval winter from an obstacle to endure into a catalyst for developing capabilities that enhanced European civilization throughout the medieval period and established principles that continue to influence human achievement under challenging conditions. Their winter innovations in resource management reveal mathematical sophistication that challenges everything we thought we knew about medieval computational abilities. These queens weren't just rationing food until spring arrived. They were creating early economic models that calculated probability distributions for different weather scenarios, population fluctuations, and supply chain disruptions that could occur months in advance. Consider the complexity involved in Blanche's resource calculations. She had to estimate caloric needs for hundreds of thousands of people across different age groups, activity levels, and health conditions. She had to factor in spoilage rates that varied depending on storage methods, temperature fluctuations, and humidity levels. She had to account for distribution logistics across territories, where transportation became exponentially more difficult as winter progressed. But here's what makes this truly extraordinary. She was doing these calculations without computers, without statistical software, without even reliable weather forecasting. She was creating comprehensive economic models in her head, using nothing but practical experience and mathematical intuition that was centuries ahead of formal economic theory. The precision required was staggering because the margin for error was literally life and death for entire populations. Miscalculate food needs by 10%, and thousands of people would starve before spring. Underestimate fuel requirements, and entire communities could freeze to death during unexpected cold snaps. Overestimate available resources, and you'd commit to supporting population levels that couldn't be sustained when reality hit. These queens had to become human computers, processing enormous amounts of variable data and producing resource allocation decisions that would determine whether entire kingdoms survived until spring. Their success proves they possessed analytical capabilities that modern economists would recognize as advanced mathematical modeling techniques. Their winter supply chains required logistical coordination that seems impossible by medieval transportation standards. Moving massive quantities of food, fuel, and supplies across territories, where roads became impassable and rivers froze solid, demanded transportation innovations that were decades ahead of their time. Eleanor's mobile court system required logistics capabilities that would challenge modern military organizations. She had to coordinate the movement of hundreds of people with all their equipment, supplies, and luxuries across frozen landscapes during the worst weather conditions of the year. This meant calculating not just basic transportation needs, but fuel consumption for heating during travel, food preservation during extended journeys, and equipment maintenance in conditions that could destroy conventional medieval technology. The engineering solutions they developed for winter transportation were revolutionary. They created specialized vehicles designed for snow and ice travel, developed new harness systems that allowed horses to pull heavy loads across frozen terrain, and invented route planning methods that could navigate safely through winter conditions that made normal medieval travel impossible. Their communication systems during winter months required signal technologies that functioned reliably in conditions that would destroy conventional medieval communication methods. They had to design backup systems for when primary signals failed, create redundant networks that could route around damaged sections, and develop encoding methods that ensured message accuracy when errors could have catastrophic consequences. The geographical scope of these winter communication networks was extraordinary by any historical standard. Messages could travel hundreds of miles during blizzards that made normal travel impossible, coordinating complex operations across territories that stretched from northern Scotland to the Mediterranean coast. This required engineering expertise and organizational capabilities that wouldn't become common until much later historical periods. But their most remarkable innovation was understanding how winter psychology could be transformed from a weakness into a strategic advantage. While other rulers struggled with population depression and social breakdown during dark months, these queens developed systematic approaches to winter mental health that created stronger, more loyal communities than existed anywhere else in medieval Europe. They recognized that winter isolation created unique opportunities for intensive relationship building that were impossible during busy summer seasons. When people were confined together for months, when survival depended on cooperation, when shared hardships created mutual dependence, the social bonds formed were much deeper and more durable than normal political relationships. Their winter courts became psychological laboratories where they could study human behavior under extreme stress and develop interventions that maintained mental health during conditions that drove most people towards depression and despair. They understood that winter survival required more than just physical resources. It demanded psychological resilience that could only be maintained through systematic support programs. The therapeutic techniques they developed were centuries ahead of formal psychological understanding. They created group activities that provided emotional catharsis, designed social rituals that reinforced community bonds, and established support networks that helped individuals cope with the isolation and anxiety that affected everyone during medieval winters. Their approach to winter entertainment reveals sophisticated understanding of how cultural activities could serve multiple psychological functions simultaneously. Musical performances weren't just distractions from hardship. They were carefully designed emotional interventions that helped people process stress and maintain hope during the darkest months. Storytelling competitions served crucial psychological purposes beyond simple entertainment. They preserved cultural memory during months when normal educational activities were impossible, provided verbal stimulation that maintained cognitive abilities, and created shared experiences that bonded communities together during the most isolating time of year. Artistic projects gave people creative outlets that were essential for mental health during extended periods of confinement and survival anxiety. These weren't random crafts to keep hands busy. They were systematic programs designed to provide psychological benefits that enhanced community resilience throughout winter months. The mathematical precision underlying these psychological interventions was extraordinary. These queens had to calculate not just physical resource needs, but emotional and spiritual requirements for maintaining population morale during months of darkness and uncertainty. They understood that human beings needed more than food and shelter to survive. They needed hope, purpose, and social connection to maintain the psychological resilience necessary for enduring extreme hardship. Their success in maintaining population psychology during winter created cumulative advantages that strengthened their kingdoms throughout the year. Communities that emerged from harsh conditions with intact social bonds and high morale were more productive in spring agriculture, more effective in summer military campaigns, and more prosperous in autumn trade activities. The economic implications were profound because psychological health during winter months determined economic productivity throughout the following year. Populations that had been psychologically damaged by winter hardship would be unable to participate effectively in the complex economic activities that medieval prosperity required. Their winter psychological programs also served crucial political functions that enhanced their long-term governance effectiveness. People who had been supported through their darkest months by royal programs developed loyalty that went far beyond normal political relationships. This psychological loyalty proved more reliable than conventional political alliances and created political stability that lasted for decades. Their understanding of how extreme conditions affected human psychology led to innovations in leadership development that were centuries ahead of their time. They used winter isolation as intensive training periods for developing governance capabilities throughout their populations, identifying people who demonstrated competence during crisis conditions, and providing them with advanced education in political, economic, and military leadership. These winter leadership development programs created administrative capabilities that strengthened their governments for generations. Young nobles who learned statecraft during harsh conditions developed practical experience that couldn't be gained during normal times, and they understood firsthand how effective governance required comprehensive attention to all aspects of human welfare. The technological innovations emerging from their winter problem-solving sessions were extraordinary by medieval standards. When people were confined together with limited resources and unlimited time, when survival depended on creative solutions to practical problems, when traditional methods proved inadequate, that's when breakthrough innovations became possible. Their winter courts became research laboratories that produced engineering solutions, agricultural techniques, and manufacturing methods that were decades ahead of their time. The intensive problem-solving environment created by winter isolation accelerated innovation in ways that comfortable circumstances never could. Their heating technology innovations revolutionized medieval architecture throughout Europe. They developed insulation methods that reduced fuel consumption, ventilation systems that improved air quality, and heating designs that could warm large spaces efficiently even during the most severe weather conditions. Their food preservation techniques transformed medieval nutrition and made it possible to support larger populations during winter months. They invented new storage methods that reduced spoilage, developed processing techniques that enhanced nutritional value, and created distribution systems that ensured more equitable food allocation during harsh conditions. Their medical innovations during winter months advanced healthcare capabilities in ways that saved countless lives throughout medieval Europe. They developed treatments for cold weather injuries, nutritional therapies for winter-related illnesses, and psychological interventions for seasonal depression that were centuries ahead of formal medical knowledge. But their most important technological legacy was proving that extreme conditions could accelerate human innovation in ways that normal circumstances never achieved. They demonstrated that when survival depended on solving complex problems quickly, when traditional methods failed completely, when creative thinking became essential for avoiding disaster, human ingenuity could produce breakthrough solutions that transformed entire civilizations. Their success attracted the most brilliant minds from across medieval Europe to their winter courts. Scholars, engineers, artists, and inventors would deliberately choose to spend harsh months in these intensive problem-solving environments because the collaborative innovation produced insights and discoveries that were impossible elsewhere. The mathematical sophistication required for coordinating all these winter innovations simultaneously reveals analytical capabilities that seem impossible by traditional medieval standards. These queens had to balance resource allocations for psychological programs, technological research, military preparations, educational activities, and basic population survival, all while managing the fundamental challenge of keeping entire kingdoms alive during the most dangerous season of the year. Their ability to process this enormous complexity and make effective decisions under extreme pressure proves that medieval society possessed intellectual resources that historians have consistently underestimated. These queens developed mathematical, engineering, psychological, and strategic thinking skills through practical necessity that were far more advanced than the theoretical knowledge preserved in formal medieval academic institutions. Their comprehensive approach to winter governance created integrated systems that influenced European political development throughout the medieval period and beyond. Their demonstration that multiple complex challenges could be managed simultaneously during extreme conditions established models for governmental competence that remained relevant throughout the evolution of European political institutions. Their success also influenced international relations in ways that enhanced their diplomatic effectiveness throughout the year. Foreign rulers who observed their winter governance capabilities recognized that these queens possessed administrative and strategic competencies that made them valuable allies and dangerous enemies regardless of seasonal conditions. The reputation for winter invincibility that these queens developed created psychological advantages that often proved more decisive than military or economic superiority. Enemies who knew they were facing rulers who could maintain full effectiveness during conditions that paralyzed other governments often chose negotiation over confrontation, recognizing that winter campaigns against such opponents were essentially impossible to win. Their winter diplomatic innovations established new protocols for international negotiation that influenced medieval diplomacy for generations. They proved that extreme conditions could be used to test diplomatic commitment, create binding agreements that carried unusual emotional weight, and forge alliances that would survive normal political pressures because they had been forged under extraordinary circumstances. Their cultural innovations during winter months created artistic and intellectual traditions that shaped European development for centuries. The intensive creative work produced during winter isolation established new forms of artistic expression specifically designed for extreme conditions. And these innovations influenced European aesthetic development throughout the medieval period and beyond. Their winter educational programs established principles of intensive learning that revolutionized medieval academic development. They proved that concentrated study periods under challenging conditions could produce educational results that were impossible during normal academic schedules, and their methods became models for later European university systems. But perhaps their most profound legacy was their demonstration that the relationship between environmental challenge and human achievement was far more positive and complex than anyone had previously understood. They proved that extreme conditions didn't just test existing capabilities. They actually created possibilities for developing entirely new forms of human excellence that could transform civilizations. Their integrated approach to transforming winter from obstacle to opportunity established paradigms for crisis leadership that remained relevant throughout European history. During later periods of extreme challenge, leaders could reference their examples for guidance about how harsh circumstances could be converted into foundations for extraordinary achievement. Their mathematical precision, technological innovation, psychological sophistication, and administrative excellence during medieval Europe's most challenging season proved that when survival requires breakthrough thinking, when conventional methods fail completely, when the stakes become high enough to demand transcending normal limitations, human capabilities can achieve results that seem impossible under ordinary circumstances. The winter mastery of these 5 remarkable queens represents one of the most extraordinary examples of human excellence under extreme conditions in recorded history. Their comprehensive transformation of medieval Europe's greatest seasonal challenge into opportunities for unprecedented achievement established principles about the relationship between adversity and human potential that continue to influence our understanding of what becomes possible when survival depends on innovation, integration, and the courage to challenge assumptions about what extreme conditions actually make possible. Their legacy proves that harsh circumstances don't limit human potential, they reveal it. When everything depends on finding solutions that have never been tried before, when traditional approaches prove completely inadequate, when the margin for error disappears entirely, that's when human ingenuity, analytical capability, and leadership excellence can transcend normal boundaries and create achievements that change the course of history. These queens didn't just survive medieval winter, they mastered it so completely that they transformed European understanding of what effective governance could accomplish under any conditions. Their success established models for comprehensive crisis leadership that remained influential for centuries and proved that when challenges become extreme enough to demand innovation, human capabilities can rise to levels that seem impossible until someone demonstrates that they're not just possible, but achievable through systematic preparation, integrated thinking, and the determination to transform every obstacle into an opportunity for excellence. The winter innovations of these queens created ripple effects that transformed medieval European society in ways that extended far beyond their individual kingdoms. When word spread about rulers who could maintain not just survival but prosperity during the harshest months, it fundamentally changed how other medieval leaders understood the possibilities of seasonal governance. Think about the psychological impact on neighboring kingdoms when they discovered that some territories were actually thriving during months when everyone else was barely surviving. Imagine being a medieval noble struggling to keep your people alive until spring. When you hear reports about courts, where winter had become a season of cultural flowering, technological breakthrough, and political strengthening. This created what we might recognize today as medieval technology transfer on an unprecedented scale. Desperate rulers began sending delegations to study these winter governance methods, creating informal networks of knowledge exchange that accelerated innovation throughout medieval Europe. The techniques that had been developed through necessity in a few exceptional courts began spreading across the continent. But here's what makes this truly remarkable. The queens who had mastered winter governance understood that their innovations represented strategic advantages that could be leveraged for broader political influence. They began using their winter expertise as diplomatic tools, offering to share knowledge in exchange for political alliances, trade agreements, and territorial concessions. Eleanor's winter mobility techniques became so legendary that other rulers would pay enormous sums just to have her advisors teach their administrators basic cold weather logistics. The ability to maintain governmental effectiveness during winter months had become a form of medieval strategic technology that could be traded like any other valuable resource. Margaret's intellectual winter court model was copied throughout medieval Scotland and northern England, but most attempts failed because other rulers lacked the psychological sophistication necessary to maintain productive scholarly communities during harsh conditions. The queens who had succeeded understood that winter intellectual programs required more than just gathering smart people together. They demanded comprehensive support systems that addressed every aspect of human need during extreme conditions. Matilda's winter warfare innovations spread throughout medieval military establishments. But again, most commanders discovered that implementing these techniques required capabilities they simply didn't possess. The mathematical precision needed for winter siege calculations, the engineering expertise required for cold weather military equipment, and the logistical coordination necessary for winter campaigns demanded intellectual resources that were rare in medieval military leadership. Berengaria's psychological support programs attracted attention from across medieval Europe because they addressed problems that affected every winter population. But replicating her success required understanding of human psychology under stress that was centuries ahead of its time. Most rulers could copy the surface activities, the music and storytelling and artistic projects, but they missed the sophisticated therapeutic framework that made these programs actually effective. Blanche's comprehensive integration of multiple winter governance systems represented the ultimate achievement in medieval crisis management, but it also required administrative capabilities that were almost impossible to duplicate. The mathematical sophistication, organizational complexity, and strategic intelligence necessary to coordinate such comprehensive programs simultaneously was beyond the reach of most medieval governments. The result was a form of medieval technological inequality that created persistent advantages for territories that could master winter governance, while leaving others permanently disadvantaged. Kingdoms that learned to thrive during winter months accumulated economic, military, and cultural advantages that compounded over time, while regions that continued to view winter as merely something to endure fell increasingly behind in overall development. This technological inequality had profound implications for medieval European political development. The queens who had mastered winter governance found themselves leading territories that were becoming demonstrably more prosperous, more stable, and more innovative than neighboring regions. Their success created momentum that attracted additional resources, talent, and opportunities, further widening the gap between winter-competent and winter-limited kingdoms. The economic implications were particularly dramatic because winter mastery affected productivity throughout the entire year. Territories that emerged from harsh months with strong social bonds, high morale, and enhanced capabilities were more effective in spring agriculture, summer commerce, and autumn military campaigns. The cumulative economic advantages created by superior winter governance generated prosperity that lasted for decades. But the most profound long-term impact was how these queens changed medieval European understanding of the relationship between seasonal conditions and human potential. Before their achievements, winter had been universally viewed as a limitation that had to be endured. After their success, winter became recognized as a potential catalyst for exceptional achievement that could accelerate human development in ways that normal conditions never could. This shift in thinking influenced medieval European culture in ways that extended far beyond governance and politics. Artists began creating works specifically designed for winter audiences, recognizing that harsh conditions created unique aesthetic opportunities. Scholars started planning intensive research projects for winter months, understanding that enforced isolation could accelerate intellectual breakthrough. Military strategists began viewing winter not as an obstacle to warfare, but as a season when properly prepared forces could achieve decisive advantages over unprepared enemies. The educational implications were equally significant because the success of winter learning programs challenged basic assumptions about how knowledge could be transmitted most effectively. The intensive study environments created by winter isolation produced educational results that were impossible during normal academic schedules, establishing new models for learning that influenced European educational development for centuries. Religious institutions throughout medieval Europe began adapting winter governance innovations for their own communities. Monasteries and convents discovered that the psychological support techniques, resource management methods, and cultural programs developed by these queens could enhance spiritual life during harsh months. Winter became recognized as a season of potential spiritual intensification, rather than merely a time of physical hardship. The technological innovations emerging from winter governance programs began influencing medieval European development in multiple sectors simultaneously. Agricultural techniques developed for winter food production improved year-round farming productivity. Construction methods created for winter building projects enhanced architectural capabilities throughout all seasons. Transportation innovations designed for winter travel revolutionized medieval logistics and communication systems. But perhaps most importantly, the success of these winter queens established new expectations for medieval leadership that raised standards throughout European political development. After their achievements, rulers who couldn't maintain effectiveness during harsh conditions were viewed as fundamentally incompetent, regardless of their summer capabilities. This created pressure for comprehensive leadership development that influenced medieval European political education for generations. Young nobles began receiving training in crisis management, resource calculation, psychological support, and integrated systems thinking that had never been considered necessary for effective governance. The intellectual requirements for medieval leadership had been permanently elevated by the winter achievements of these remarkable queens. The international implications extended far beyond medieval Europe, as word of these winter governance innovations spread to other regions and cultures. Diplomatic missions came from the Middle East, North Africa, and even Asia to study methods that seemed to represent breakthrough approaches to seasonal crisis management that could be adapted for different climates and cultural contexts. The mathematical techniques developed for winter resource management influenced commercial and governmental calculation throughout the medieval world. The psychological interventions created for winter mental health became models for crisis counseling that were adapted for different types of emergency conditions. The engineering solutions invented for winter problems provided technological foundations that enhanced infrastructure development across multiple civilizations. Their success also challenged cultural assumptions about gender and leadership capability that had persisted across multiple societies. The demonstration that women could possess superior administrative, strategic, and innovative capabilities during the most challenging conditions influenced gender expectations throughout medieval international relations and established new possibilities for female political participation. The military innovations developed during winter campaigns influenced warfare throughout medieval Europe and beyond. The siege techniques, logistics methods, and strategic approaches that had been created for harsh weather conditions proved equally effective during normal military campaigns, creating tactical advantages that lasted throughout the year. But the most profound international impact was the establishment of winter governance competence as a measure of civilizational advancement that influenced how medieval societies evaluated their own development relative to other cultures. Territories that could thrive during harsh conditions were recognized as possessing superior organizational capabilities that indicated broader societal sophistication. The cultural innovations emerging from winter courts influenced artistic and intellectual development throughout medieval Europe in ways that created lasting traditions of seasonal creativity. The musical compositions, literary works, and philosophical insights generated during winter isolation established aesthetic and intellectual movements that shaped European cultural development for centuries. The architectural innovations required for effective winter governance influenced building design throughout medieval Europe. The heating systems, insulation methods, and construction techniques developed for harsh weather conditions improved quality of life during all seasons and established engineering principles that remained relevant throughout European architectural development. The communication innovations necessary for winter coordination created information networks that enhanced governmental and commercial effectiveness throughout the year. The signal systems, message encoding methods, and information management techniques developed for harsh conditions provided communication capabilities that gave winter-competent territories decisive advantages in diplomacy, trade, and military coordination. The agricultural innovations emerging from winter food production programs revolutionized medieval farming throughout Europe. The crop storage techniques, processing methods, and distribution systems developed for harsh months improved nutrition and food security throughout the year, supporting larger populations and creating agricultural surplus that funded economic growth for decades. The medical innovations developed for winter health challenges advanced medieval healthcare in ways that enhanced population welfare throughout all seasons. The treatments for cold weather injuries, nutritional therapies for winter-related illnesses, and psychological interventions for seasonal mental health problems created medical knowledge that influenced European healthcare development for centuries. But their most important legacy was establishing the principle that extreme conditions could be transformed into catalysts for exceptional human achievement through comprehensive preparation, innovative thinking, and integrated systems management. They proved that harsh circumstances didn't represent limitations on human potential. They created opportunities for developing capabilities that would be impossible under normal conditions. Their winter mastery demonstrated that when survival requires breakthrough thinking, when conventional methods prove completely inadequate, when the stakes become high enough to demand transcending normal limitations, human ingenuity can produce solutions that seem impossible until someone proves they're achievable through systematic innovation and determined excellence. The comprehensive nature of their achievements, integrating resource management, psychological support, technological innovation, military strategy, cultural development, and administrative coordination simultaneously, established models for complex crisis leadership that influenced European governmental development throughout the medieval period and beyond. Their success proved that medieval society possessed intellectual, organizational, and innovative capabilities that have been consistently underestimated by historians focusing on formal institutions rather than practical problem-solving achievements. The mathematical sophistication, engineering expertise, psychological insight, and strategic intelligence they demonstrated during winter governance challenges conventional assumptions about medieval human potential. Their story reveals that the relationship between environmental challenge and human achievement is far more positive and transformative than traditional historical accounts suggest. They establish principles about converting adversity into advantage that remain relevant for understanding how extreme conditions can accelerate human development and create possibilities for exceptional accomplishment. The winter achievements of Margaret, Eleanor, Matilda, Berengaria, and Blanche represent one of history's most remarkable examples of comprehensive crisis mastery that transformed challenges into opportunities for unprecedented civilizational advancement. Their legacy proves that when conditions become extreme enough to make innovation essential for survival, human capabilities can transcend normal limitations and achieve results that change the course of historical development. Their integrated approach to winter governance created systematic methods for thriving under extreme conditions that influenced European political, economic, cultural, and technological development for centuries. They established that effective leadership during crisis periods requires not just reactive management, but proactive transformation of challenges into foundations for long-term excellence. Their mathematical precision in resource management, psychological sophistication in population support, technological innovation in problem-solving, strategic intelligence in military planning, cultural creativity in artistic development, and administrative excellence in governmental coordination combined to create leadership capabilities that were centuries ahead of their time and established standards for comprehensive crisis excellence that remained influential throughout European historical development. Most importantly, their winter mastery proved that human potential under extreme conditions extends far beyond mere survival to encompass possibilities for breakthrough achievement that can transform entire civilizations when challenges are approached with comprehensive preparation, systematic innovation, and the determination to convert every obstacle into an opportunity for demonstrating what becomes possible when excellence is demanded by circumstances that accept nothing less than extraordinary success. The mathematical precision these queens demonstrated in winter resource calculations reveals computational abilities that seem impossible without modern technology. But consider what they actually accomplished using nothing but mental arithmetic and practical experience. They were calculating optimal food distribution across populations that fluctuated based on refugee movements, disease outbreaks, and seasonal mortality rates that could change weekly. Blanche's resource management required her to factor in spoilage rates that varied depending on storage temperature, humidity levels, and container materials. She had to account for transportation losses across routes where weather conditions could destroy entire supply convoys without warning. Most remarkably, she had to balance immediate survival needs against long-term strategic requirements, maintaining reserves for military campaigns while ensuring adequate nutrition for civilian populations. This wasn't simple addition and subtraction. These queens were creating probability models that accounted for dozens of variables simultaneously. They calculated risk assessments for different weather scenarios, estimated population needs based on demographic data they gathered through systematic observation, and developed contingency plans for supply chain disruptions that could occur months in the future. Their success rate proves they possessed analytical capabilities that modern economists would recognize as sophisticated mathematical modeling. The margin for error was literally life and death for hundreds of thousands of people. Yet these queens consistently made calculations that kept entire kingdoms alive and prosperous throughout the harshest months medieval Europe had ever experienced. But their mathematical sophistication extended far beyond resource management into areas that reveal even more extraordinary intellectual capabilities. Their military logistics calculations were so complex they required simultaneous optimization of multiple competing variables under conditions where traditional mathematical approaches would fail completely. Eleanor's mobile winter courts required calculating fuel consumption rates for heating during travel, food preservation requirements for extended journeys, equipment maintenance schedules in conditions that could destroy medieval technology overnight, and route planning that factored in weather probability distributions across vast geographical areas. She had to coordinate the movement of hundreds of people with their supplies and equipment across territories where conditions changed unpredictably, and backup options were limited or non-existent. This required real-time calculation adjustments based on constantly changing information, essentially creating dynamic mathematical models that could adapt to new circumstances instantly. The precision required was staggering because errors in calculation could result in her entire court freezing to death in remote locations during winter storms. Yet Eleanor's mobile court system functioned with reliability that seems impossible by medieval transportation standards, proving she had mastered mathematical techniques for managing complex logistics under extreme uncertainty. Their communication systems reveal another dimension of mathematical sophistication that challenges everything we thought we knew about medieval computational capabilities. These queens had to design redundant networks that could function when primary systems failed, calculate optimal message routing across territories where communication delays could vary dramatically based on weather conditions, and develop encoding systems that ensured accuracy when transmission errors could have catastrophic consequences. The geographical scope of these communication networks required mathematical modeling that accounted for signal degradation over distance, weather interference patterns, and relay station reliability under extreme conditions. They had to calculate optimal placement for signal fires and message stations that would function effectively throughout winter months when maintenance became nearly impossible. Their success in maintaining reliable communication across hundreds of miles during the worst weather conditions proves they understood principles of network optimization and redundancy planning that wouldn't be formally recognized for centuries. They were essentially creating early telecommunication systems using medieval technology and mathematical techniques that were far ahead of their time. These 5 extraordinary queens proved that when everything depends on innovation, when survival hangs by a thread, when the stakes couldn't be higher, that's exactly when human capabilities can shatter every limitation we thought existed. They transformed medieval Europe's deadliest season into humanity's greatest showcase of what becomes possible when excellence isn't just preferred, it's required for survival. Their winter mastery established principles about crisis leadership and human potential that continue shaping our understanding of what we can achieve when ordinary solutions simply aren't enough.